What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. And you are hearing my voice first, ladies and gentlemen. That lets you know everything you need to know. Our fearless leader, Chris, is out of action on this one. So it is myself leading the ship today, Jurgen bringing you all in. But it's a little bit different than normal, actually, as well, because Dame is not joining me either. So I think for the first time in Somewhat Sports history, ladies and gentlemen, 2/3 of the show is out for the program in a given week. Now, I know what everyone is saying. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to be a solo podcast today. I would not have allowed that. Chris and Dame probably would have had the confidence to just let me run a show by myself, but I wasn't doing that. I'm not letting that happen for the beautiful people. But guys, don't worry, because when I was given the news that Dame would be incapacitated for the episode, I make it sound like he's been knocked down in an alley somewhere, but don't worry, he's fine. And that Chris wouldn't be able to make it. I knew who I had to call. This man is well known for his baseball acumen and knowledge. Football as well, but we're talking baseball today, ladies and gentlemen. It's the MLB talk that is, we kind of teased last week, which we were going to come back to, but the deadline didn't happen. But semantics. Ladies and gentlemen, my brother joining me on this show for the first time in a while. This man is a beast. Literally, he's ran the Spartan Beast race before. At least I think that's the name of it. If it's not, he'll correct me here in a moment when I bring him on. But ladies and gentlemen, the return of the man, the myth, the podcasting legend, the baseball don himself, James Barcia. Bars Talks. Brother, how we doing? It's been way too long.
Oh, man, you guys really had to dig out deep for some help. You're bringing me out here, Jurg. How's it been, brother? It has been too long, but having a good time. I'm excited to be here, excited to talk some sports. A lot happened, especially, unfortunately, my Mets. I'm ready to complain all about that, if I'm being quite honest. But happy you reached out, man. It's been a bit.
Of course, bro. I knew the second that I got the news for Chris and Dame, it's like, all right, there's one man. There is literally only one man. It was you or the solo show. That's all it was going to be. Maybe it speaks more to the fact that I have a very limited amount of contacts on my phone, but we're going to ignore that. But no, brother, I'm happy to have you on, and it's only fitting that the Bunts and Bruises contingent returns and takes over an episode of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. And it's all baseball, ladies and gentlemen. And as I kind of alluded to moments ago, this is an all MLB Trade Deadline episode where we're going to break down some of the bigger happenings of this deadline. Now, I know some people might be listening and think, this wasn't that eventful of a deadline. And you're partially right. But at the same time, there are still some headlines that we're going to go after here. Bars made mention to himself. He is a Mets fan, for those that have listened to us in the past and when he has appeared on this program as well. He is a Mets fan. Chris is a Mets fan, as people know, and Dame is a Yankees fan. So two teams on opposite ends of the spectrum that we're going to be talking about in this episode for two very different reasons in regards to what their deadline activities were. We also have a couple teams, well, quite a number of teams that were pretty active at the deadlines, a good amount of teams bulking up. We're going to end the show talking about teams that really started to stock up for the deadline and how it's going to look for the rest of the season. Some teams really made some big moves, and we're also going to be talking about the teams that really went on fire sales at this trade deadline. And you know what, Bars, actually, I think we're going to start with those two teams for the show. Save the New York contingent in the middle. I got when Chris and Dame do eventually listen back to this, I got to give a little bit of pat at the beginning before the two of them each undergo their own emotional turmoil of listening to that section of the pod. So we're actually going to start things off with the tearing down teams here at the beginning of this 2023 MLB Trade Deadline talk. Bars, you ready, man?
I'm ready. I was born ready. You know that.
I love to hear it. All right, let's get things going. Guys, the MLB 2023 trade deadline was marked by a good amount of deals. A lot of teams making big decisions to want to compete for the rest of the season. Some teams kind of shocking, but then there were also teams that made the decision of, you know what? Pack it up, boys. It's just not our year. And two teams in particular made that very, very clear with the transactions they made. Ironically, both Central teams, one from the AL and one from the NL. Let us start with the AL Central team that I think for the most part, if we did a midseason recap, which maybe we'll do in a future episode here in the next week or two, this would certainly be one of, if not the most disappointing team of the season, especially in their division. And if you don't believe me, just please, ladies and gentlemen, YouTube the White Sox fan radio call rant. Good God, it's an amazing rant. It's one of the best ones I've heard by a fan in a while. I'm sure bars. I see you smirking. I know you probably listened to that one, so you already know what I'm alluding to there.
Yeah, nah, I heard that. A good time. It's I highly recommend listen.
It very is. You feel the emotion, and at the same time, the man was just spitting facts, and he wasn't wrong. So the Chicago White Sox, ladies and gentlemen, went through a good amount of selling off at this trade deadline. Obviously, a team that has fell way below expectations, a AL Central that was pretty wide open for the taking, if we're being honest, at the start of the season. At least, Bars, we never really talked at the start of the season about predictions, but I'm assuming you were in the similar mindset that most people were. The AL Central was basically just like, hey, who's going to put together the best 2-3 week stretches at a time could probably take the division. The White Sox have just not been that. 14 games below 500 up to this point. Or actually, no, excuse me, 24 games below 500 up to this point. Not good. Not great, Bob, as one of my friends likes to quote. So they decided to make a good amount of deals, and here are the deals in order. Very quick here. The Chicago White Sox dealt a lot of their pitching rotation in this one, trading both Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. The Angels, maybe we'll bring them up later in the episode because they were certainly busy little buyers at this 2023 deadline. They also traded Lance Lynn to the LA Dodgers a couple of days, I think it was like 2 days before the trade deadline. I want to say that was one of those pre-deadline deals. Giolito may have been the same thing. They traded Kendall Graveman to the Houston Astros. They traded Keenan, excuse me, I almost had Kenyon, but Keenan Middleton to the New York Yankees. And then the last of the main trades that they did was trading Jake Burger to the Miami Marlins. So shout out to the Marlins as well, being a buying team. Bars, when it comes to the White Sox exodus of talent, a couple hitters, a hitter there, but for the most part, just pitcher after pitcher after pitcher going away. And that kind of makes sense because honestly, I think, not to last season, but I think it was 2 seasons ago, I want to say, when the White Sox had that really good start to the season under La Russa, and they completely fell apart in the second half and flamed out in the playoffs. I think the biggest thing for them was just the pitching absolutely went away from what the standard was at the start of what would have been the 2021 season, I think is the season I'm thinking of. And then it just continued for that year. 2022 was not a good year, and then this year was just bad. So what do you think of the White Sox just trading away basically any and every arm whatsoever from their rotation?
I mean, it's weird, man, because like you said, everyone, me, myself included, expected the White Sox to like do something this year. I've been like a little White Sox fan from like afar, just because they had that core that you really thought was going to blow up, and Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez, who's probably the biggest like disappointment ever because he was supposed to be a star, just never worked out, and just a couple other names they got out there, but I I get exactly why they traded all these arms because they weren't going anywhere. Unfortunately, you thought the Cubs were going to have a god awful season, and the Cubs have a better season than the White Sox do at the moment. So that's just already one part in that. Aside from that, I what did they really trade? Like these weren't guys exactly having stellar seasons, in my opinion. Like Lucas Giolito, I personally don't think that was the biggest loss in the world. I mean, that trade obviously showed that where they were and what their thinking was behind their entire season. But Giolito, he once used to be good, but after he had that major injury, he just never was the same pitcher. He's more, it feels like a locker room guy now at this point, where he was just a long time White Sox from the get, started from young to now. And, anything they got for him at this point is good. He was 29. He's not the best part of his career anymore. As I said, maybe the Angels could find something and squeeze a little bit out of him. But other than that, same thing with Lance Lynn. Last year was the year to trade him if you really were going to trade him. He's not having a god awful season, but last year he was having a lights out season. So imagine what he would have got you. Uh, and then Jake Berger, like I don't get what the Marlins are doing there, but hey, for the White Sox, it's great. The moves they made, I'm not up against them because they traded basically a bunch of older players. The youngest one I believe was Jake Berger actually, and he's batting 214. So it's like, really, what do we lose here? I like that they figured let's wrap it up, get whatever prospects we can. I'm actually shocked they didn't trade Tim Anderson, to be honest, who I'm a big fan of, but he's having a god awful year, which is also part of the reason why this year hasn't worked out. I mean, I'd consider blowing it all up, to be quite honest with you, because I don't see what the White Sox are building here anymore. At one point, it seemed like they had a really bright future, but we're getting to the point now where it's really questionable what they're doing. And you got to wonder if those Tony La Russa years were wasted on that young core they should have been so much better than they were. But here we are now making a mini fire sale.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it, the young core that this team had just a couple years ago, and the White Sox now going back to having to build up the farm system to hope for a better turnaround in a couple years' time, which was kind of what this some of these guys actually were part of, at least mainly Giolito and Berger themselves, a part of that team that was talented, like you mentioned, Eloy Jimenez, who's kind of flamed out now in part mainly due to injuries in his career, Tim Anderson, who showed flashes early enough, still a pretty good player, but like you said, just having a down season compared to the all-star standard we have seen him set for himself. And maybe with Anderson, it was just a case of maybe he could have been available, but they were probably just asking for too much due to what he'd done in the past, and teams just maybe weren't willing to pay it this time around, especially for a guy that I'm sure he's probably due a contract here within the next year or two, in terms of being paid at the peak of his powers, or at least close to it. I'm with you. I think for the White Sox, I kind of want to give them credit for at least moving on from a good amount of guys. And I wouldn't necessarily be the most surprised in the world if we see some of that continue during the offseason. I think this could be just a sign of the start to where maybe they're going to be interested in moving a couple more pieces, because it's going to be tough. And like you mentioned, they just went all in on trying to get prospects. They sent Berger over to the Marlins. They got who was the Marlins' number 4 prospect in their system at the
Which
time.
is insane to me. I don't get how they did it, to be
Yeah.
honest. But hey,
Do you take advantage of a team that wants to desperately make a playoff push, and you can get that? They traded Lance Lynn to the Dodgers. They got the Dodgers' number 9 prospect, I want to say, in that deal. And then they sent Lucas Giolito over to the Angels. And I want to say they got the Angels two of the top 6 prospects in the Angels system, if I'm not mistaken. It was a return along those lines, maybe 2 of the top 8. I'm misremembering their exact numbers, like off the dome, but it was a decent return actually for what you consider. You mentioned Barnes, like a lot, like just the White Sox as a whole. When you're a team like them and you're just having a down year, that means everyone will. And you mentioned in the past that these guys had better seasons previously. They could have been sold for higher. I think for the most part, in a good amount of these trades, they got, at least for their main pieces, they got top 10 prospects back in other teams' respective systems. That's not the worst return in the world. Could it have been better maybe a year ago had they made this decision sooner? Absolutely. But what do we say sometimes? Hindsight is 2020. At the end of the day, you just have to make the deals and try to get the best out of them when you can in the moment. And I got to give the White Sox a little bit of credit here. They did a relatively good job at that for the most part. And again, we'll see what the future holds for the Chicago White Sox, but not a lot of winning. I'll say that. Not a lot of winning, again, especially in that division where it just looked like it was really anyone's for the taking. And the White Sox, I thought they were going to put it together, but just disappointment, ultimately speaking. And hey, maybe, they got a pitcher back in a couple of these trades. Maybe it'll be the start of them just hitting the reset button on that rotation. Maybe they keep some of the hitters. Maybe they keep Tim Anderson. Maybe they hope Eloy Jimenez can finally turn around all the bad injury luck that he's had in his career. And maybe they'll rise in 2 years from now. Or maybe I'm just trying to give them false hope. I don't know. We'll see. But from that AL Central team, let's skip over, Bars, to the NL Central side of things, where I noticed relatively early in the season, Bars, that they were struggling a little bit. The St. Louis Cardinals. I was like, yeah, it's the Cardinals. They'll come back eventually. But then we got to 30 games in and 40 games in and 50 games in. I'm like, oh, the Cardinals just don't look that special this season. And we talked about this before, Bars. Like, the Cardinals, for our lifetime, our baseball watching lifetime, have always found a way, more times than not, to get themselves in the conversation at the end of the season. They find a way to win 10 out of 12 games here and win 7 in a row here and just be consistent enough to get back into the wild card race. Like, it's been at least a decade plus of the Cardinals consistently being in that wild card race conversation, or if the NL Central is bad enough, winning the NL Central as well. So for the Cardinals to have finally decided, you know what, we're going to do a good bit of selling off, a little bit of surprise, honestly, for myself. But I also thought, you know what, yeah, this was the right decision. Now, they didn't trade all the guys that I thought they were going to trade. We might actually be talking more about who they didn't trade rather than who they did. But let's quickly mention the guys who they did trade and wear out too. The main pieces that they trade, just picking apart that rotation in and of itself. Again, another team just trading arms. Jordan Hicks being sent to the, I almost said St. Louis Blue Jays, the Toronto Blue Jays. That would have been wrong country as well as wrong. Yeah, wrong. Well, wrong city, wrong country, wrong everything there. But no, Jordan Hicks to the Toronto Blue Jays. That was not the only deal that those bird teams made, because then there was a deal, I think like 24, 48 hours later, where Paul DeJong was traded from the St. Louis Cardinals again to the Toronto Blue Jays. So Hicks and DeJong, maybe they'll be roommates for the rest of the season as they try to figure out how they're going to live in Toronto for the foreseeable future, if it is there long term. The Texas Rangers also did some wheeling and dealing with the Cardinals. Rangers were also very busy. We'll mention them in a couple moments here on the pod. Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton going to the Texas Rangers. And then finally, Jack Flaherty to the Baltimore Orioles. So complete teardown there. Again, Bars, similar to the White Sox, this is yet another team that they just dealt arm after arm. And a good amount of these guys, we agree, still very talented, but it was clear for this Cardinals team, a very shrewd running organization. They know how to get the most out of players. It just looked like that they looked at this rotation and they said, this team just isn't going to do it for us anymore. So what were your thoughts about all the trades that they made?
I mean, the Cardinals did the right moves here as well, man. They traded off some pieces, but it wasn't anyone that wasn't irreplaceable. Yeah, you got the talented Jordan Hicks, but he's no longer the same player he used to be. The big thing to me was Paul DeJong going. He's kind of like a staple there. He was never a great player, but he's been there for God knows how long. He wasn't having a great season, but has my eyebrow up to keep an eye on Bo Bichette because it was kind of weird. Bo Bichette just had a knee injury the night before this trade was made, and everyone didn't really see this happening. So just keep an eye on that just in case. It could be something bigger. God knows how that injury is, but who knows? Maybe it was just an insurance policy. Other than that, though, the players they traded, no one irreplaceable. You traded Jordan Hicks, you traded Montgomery, you traded Flaherty. Those are all good players, and as long as you got something, it's a lost season, as you said, Jurg. They weren't going anywhere, just like the White Sox. Like, we packed it in. It's all good. Uh, the weirdest thing about this is, we just were used to them being in there all the time. So the fact that it's the Reds at top of this division, that's like the last team I would usually expect at the top of the Central Division. But with with these trades, man, don't expect the Cardinals to be down for long. They did was juice up their farm system again. They got a couple good players. I don't think it was anyone who jumps out of the page, but hey, when it's a lost season, anyone on an expiring contract that isn't going to be there next year, if you could get something back for it, it's always a win. So it's a little frowned upon where they're at the moment, but hey, at least they made the moves they had to make for 2024.
Right. I was actually going to say real quick because there's one question that I want to bring up with again guys that they didn't end up parting ways with. But who do you think, like gut reaction, who do you think made out better from their deals, the White Sox or the Cardinals?
Oof. Putting me on the spot right there. I would say the White Sox, to be honest. They somehow got a little bit more. I feel like the prospects, like you said, they got a couple of the top prospects in some people's farm system. They had the top 10 prospects you said. I double checked on it. It was number 9 and 4. You were correct there. They had another top 10 prospect from somebody else's farm system. So the Cardinals did get a bunch of people and they did get good assets back with these prospects, but it was the White Sox who came out with more of the top people. Like for Jordan Montgomery and Stratton, Cardinals got back 11 and 14 from the Rangers, which isn't bad whatsoever, but 4 and 9 is better than 11 and 14. So the Cardinals did great, but the White Sox with what they got was just slightly better.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you there. I think on just a pure prospect value perspective, as we view it right now, it would be the White Sox. And again, we kind of mentioned Tim Anderson for them earlier. Had they decided not to trade him, maybe is that looking forward to future season? Maybe is that them biding their time? Maybe they'll wait on that. Two guys on this Cardinals team that I want to mention here, Bars. Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt. Obviously, those two guys, monsters last season. They were both NL MVP candidates at the end. Two of the three NL MVP candidates in the NL last season were St. Louis Cardinals. That lets you know how just both of them were being absolute monsters. Two outstanding players, two future Hall of Famers. I believe it was Goldschmidt that won the MVP last season, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so.
Yeah, for the year he was having. So, like you could see the team with the reigning defending NL MVP was there. Neither gets dealt, which the reason why I bring up the Cardinals kind of being shrewd earlier is because, this is a team, Bars, like you mentioned, they are used to developing guys. They could take the guy that you mentioned in the trade that they get the 11th and 14th prospects back in a couple trades. They could turn those guys into everyday starters for sure. Maybe not all stars, but everyday starters. This Cardinals team is known for being able to develop. And they have a couple of decent young players there right now. Mainly, I think they're looking forward to Brendan Donovan and Nolan Gorman being the two guys that really can take a step to end off this second half of the season. But when it comes to Goldschmidt and Arenado, you kind of mentioned the Cardinals looking to 2024. Was that your reaction to you seeing neither of them got moved at this deadline? That the Cardinals are just looking forward to next season?
I mean, if you're the Cardinals, why would you move away from him? I understand the rumors were there. I understand, yeah, maybe you want to get rid of the contract or whatever. But that's not the move, in my opinion. You're talking about, like you just said, two top three, if not the top two MVP candidates of last year. You still got what's his name? Nolan Gorman coming up from for second or third base. Well, second because Nolan's there. But you got Gorman there for second base, who he's kind of hot and cold, but when he's hot, he's been on. He's been a heavy hitting home run hitter. You got Tommy Edman, who, utility player you could throw anywhere. There's still a lot of talent on this team. Don't forget, they got outfielders. I'm not even going to go through all of them. But they got a young prospect, Jordan Walker, who you thought he was going to have a big season this year. He's kind of being a little bit of a disappointment. But they got pieces, man. So, like, why are you going to blow it all up? Honestly, I like where the Cardinals are a little better than where the Mets are this season, because the Cardinals, they at least got stars who are playing like stars should. Is Nolan and Paul both having a slightly lower season than they were last year? Sure. But the whole team at this point is having a season. So when it's a down year for the entire team, you're not expecting MVP numbers from your MVP candidates. Now, if the Cardinals come back and reload and you have Nolan Gorman not striking out as much, you have some of your outfielders and O'Neill, Newt who he had like a sick April in the beginning of the year. He was like one of the top players in the league during that month. But you got a bunch of young players. If you could have them step up, and if you could have Wilson Contreras, who it's kind of weird, they sign him for all this big money, but they kind of don't play him every day, or they don't DH him every day. It's almost like they just signed him to say, hey, we address the catcher position. But he's a big bat, and he could make a bigger difference. So if you could get players that need to hit better, and you could get that rotation uh, nice and tight again, because Cardinals used to have a great rotation. Cardinals are always an overall great team. So I have full faith in them developing their pitching to possibly go ahead and contend next year. And they got a big enough core for offense where they might not need to develop players. They could just sign some players in the free agency this year for their rotation.
Yeah, and it might just be the pitching rotation that they need to really address, because you kind of mentioned it, Bars. This hitting rotation, the hitters for the most part they have is pretty good. You mentioned both Goldschmidt and Arenado, maybe down seasons compared to last year, but still pretty good. I think Arenado is just shy under 80 RBIs right now for himself. Goldschmidt has hit 20 home runs again. Both guys are going to easily finish with 30 plus. Arenado probably a 30-100 season yet again for himself in his career. But those two, they've struggled a bit, but of course they're still great. They're still fine, and you just need to see the guys around the roster take that next step. Even a Tyler O'Neill, who a couple seasons ago, Bars, he had 34 home runs a few seasons
Yeah,
ago.
I'm almost positive he was rookie of the year, if not rookie of the year candidate, like a
Yeah,
couple seasons ago.
yeah,
So
absolutely, he was. And now this season, we talked about a guy a couple seasons ago, 34 home runs. He only has 4 this season. That is a massive downturn. Even just considering halfway point of the season, if you assume he's on a 30 home run pace, he'd be double digits this time. He's only got 4. So I think the Cardinals, like you mentioned, Bars, I think there is a belief within the organization that the problems that they have, they think are easily fixable for a good. If the hitters can have a good second half of the season, those guys return for next year, and if they just figure out the pitching rotation, whether that be within maybe a couple. You mentioned one of the young hitters that they have coming into the outfield. Maybe some young pitchers make their way through the organization to finish off this season. I think late August, early in the month of September is going to be a big time for the current crop of Cardinals players to come up and prove themselves. And then they make that one or two signing in the offseason, and they just have a well-rounded rotation again. Because like you said, one of the hallmarks of the Cardinals for the longest time is good pitching. Like they've always had a pretty good pitching rotation. They just need to get that back there. But it will not. I'm pretty confident saying it will not include Adam Wainwright next season, because oh dear God, he just can't pitch anymore. It was they brought him back for one last year, and you should have retired, Chief. You should have
yeah, I don't
retired.
know why. I don't get why he came back. I would have just, they had that moment. It was Albert. It was
Yachty.
Yachty, and it was him walking off the field. I would have retired right there. That's it. It wasn't the greatest season. It was still a good season, and it would have been legendary stuff, man. Let me ask you a question, Jurg. I don't believe there's any chance in this whatsoever. But you said one or two signings. What if the Cardinals decided, man, let's go crazy next year. Let's spend some money. Let's go for the big killer whale, and they go for Showtime. What do you think?
I mean, here's the thing. It would go against the Cardinals team that we've grown up watching, because they're very smart when it comes to money management. But if you're just asking me, should they do it? Should they go after him? The answer is absolutely yes. Like every single team in this league, I don't care how bad you were this season. You could be the A. Well, okay, maybe not the A's. Let me exclude them. 29 teams this season, come the off season, should be calling up Shohei Otani's agent and seeing if they could just have a conversation with him. If you're the Cardinals, hell yeah, why not? Like I, it wouldn't hurt to try. You know, sometimes you just have to live with rejection. I would know. I've dealt with plenty of rejection in my life. Like sometimes you just have to push on and say, you know what, go go for the next one. By the way, real quick on Adam Wainwright, the reason why he so totally came back, because I'm looking at it now, 198 career wins at this point. He needs two more to get to 200.
Okay. All right. All right. I'll forgive him then, I guess. I guess, but I mean, those 2 wins are looking a little slim this year, you know. But
I'd say, I mean, because you're out of it, you might as well just keep putting him out there to see if he does finally get it.
I'd sign up for next year if I didn't get it this year. I'm like, yo, listen, just give me another game or two and I'm out.
Just sign a 1 week contract.
That's it. I just need the win in the record book. That's all that matters.
Uh, so as Adam Wainwright tries to end his career the way he wants to, and as we talk about the Cardinals, maybe going for Showtime, which I think it wouldn't shock me if we bring him up at least one more time here towards the end of the episode, maybe even this middle portion as we're about to get into. Cardinals are going to be a team to look out for during this next MLB offseason, and the way that they develop for this year will be with a hope that the fans are going to, well, gleam towards, because good Lord, they're going to want some, because again, like you said, Bars, bizarre world. At one point, the Pirates were leading this division for a cup of coffee during the season. Now it's the Cincinnati Reds, considering the Cincinnati Reds were basically this season's Oakland A's last year for the first, 2.5 months of last season. Man, how times change in less than a year too. Isn't that crazy? Speaking of how times change, Bars, man, there was a time in this world where all that mattered in baseball, well, to at least get to the postseason, was just spend. And the big teams would be willing to spend. But it did not work out for two certain clubs this season in the 2023 MLB campaign. And of course, I'm talking about a team in the AL East. I'm talking about a team in the NL East. It's funny how we keep having, these connecting divisions on opposite sides here. But the New York Yankees and the New York Mets, both on downtrodden times, to say the very least, this season. Injuries have affected both clubs throughout the course of the campaigns. Guys not performing, whatever you want to say it is. Maybe poor managing on one side over the other. I really wish our Yankees correspondent was here to speak on that. But ultimately, both sides, as we are recording this, the 50 and 58 New York Mets and the 56 and 52 New York Yankees, both sitting towards the bottom of their divisions. The Yankees fourth in their division, which I call the AL Beast, because good Lord, the AL East has been out spectacular this year. And then the NL East, the Mets are second in the division. The Washington Nationals are the only team below them, which, I mean, at least you're not below the Nationals. I think more guys would have been sold off if the Mets were below the Nationals at this point, Bars.
Oh God, that'd be awful.
So we're going to talk about the two New York teams and the opposite ends of the spectrum for a trade deadline, because you have a team that was very actively busy during the deadline. Now, in their case, they were selling more so, but at least they were busy and made a decision. Whereas we have a team that a lot of people were waiting, expecting to be a buyer. They were reaching out to other teams and trying to gauge interest, but ultimately didn't really make a move aside from one arm in the bullpen, basically. Who do you want to talk about first, Bars? I will give you free reign democracy here.
Oh, Jurg, don't let me pick. This is like Sophie's choice right now. There's nothing. There's no good choice. Let's go Yankees, just because I'm not ready to talk into depression.
Okay, so as we push both Bars and Chris's pain here a little bit deeper into the episode, let's start twisting the knife into Dame. Why don't we spiritually we love you, Dame, but your team not doing the best right now. The New York, see, I was really waiting for the Yankees rant because I want more rants, but damn it, Dame, took that PTO perfect time. No, but in all seriousness, the New York Yankees are not good this season. Like I said, I mentioned injuries. They suffered heavily so since Aaron Judge. It's kind of been the case over the last couple seasons, Bars, when, for baseball being a sport where it's really arguably the most team orientated because one guy can only do so much. The Yankees offense is terrible when Aaron Judge is not in the lineup. Like all around the board, they hit less home runs, they hit less for average, they hit less RBIs, they basically hit less all around the board when Aaron Judge is just not there. And again, he's only one guy, and as good as the season as he was actually having before his injury, and he's actually looked not too bad since his return. For the most part, just has not been enough for the Yankees to take that. I don't even want to say next step, but to take that expected step above in this division. Again, as I mentioned before, the AL East has become the AL Beast because I think this would be the best division in football, bar none. No teams below 500 in this division. The only division that could say that for all five of their teams. And you have the Baltimore Orioles and the Tampa Bay Rays. Once again, bizarre world. But you have those two teams being above it. You have the Toronto Blue Jays being there. The only division in all of baseball, as I was mentioning, divisions before, the only division in all of baseball with three teams with 60 wins or more at this point. And the Boston Red Sox are not far behind with 57 themselves. And again, the Yankees 56. In theory, 56 and 52 is not the worst thing in the world. But the problem is that everyone in your damn division is just so good. And even when you look at the AL West briefly, you have two teams with 60 plus wins there, and then you have two more teams in that division that also have 56 wins. So just has not been a good luck season in any way, shape, or form for the New York Yankees. But you could try to blame this, that, and the third. But at the end of the day, the Yankees it's just not been consistent, whether it be a little bit with the pitching for the most part, or whether I think maybe more so what was a lot of people's problems, the hitting, especially again when Judge was out. Bars mentioning the Yankees here really quick. They were rumored to be interested in a couple of names coming into the trade deadline. I think the biggest one that I saw that they were going to keep tabs on was actually Cody Bellinger from the Chicago White Sox. I think he was a guy that I saw circulated at, well, not just the Yankees. I think a lot of teams were going to be interested in Bellinger at the deadline before ultimately he wasn't moved in any way, shape, or form. But he was one of the guys. I think they were probably making calls to some of the teams in the AL that are not so good this season, as well as the NL, but they come up very much so empty-handed from this trade deadline. Your thoughts about the Yankees just, again, not really doing anything? Because like I mentioned, yes, they did get Keenan Middleton from the White Sox, so they got an extra arm in the rotation, but I just don't think that one arm is not going to make a difference for this Yankees team that is looking like they're going to be missing the playoffs this year.
Man, I wasn't a buyer that the Yankees were buyers in any sense of the term. Like, I mean, what did they have to sell realistically? Like, let's say they did decide to finally dig into their farm system. They don't ever sell their prospects because for some reason Cashman swears they're the greatest second coming of Jesus with a baseball glove and bat. And then when they come up, they're never as great as they seem. Look at it already. You can look in the past. You got Miguel Andujar. You got Gleyber Torres, who, yes, I'll bet he's a good player. I'm not going to sit here and say he's the greatest second baseman in the league. He was expected to be a top 5 player when he was a prospect and coming up. Aside from that, you got Jason Dominguez, who did the Martian because he's an alien of talent. I have yet to see him even get a sniff of a major league field because they're just so scared to bring these guys up that when they don't perform, they're not going to have the same value. But the thing is, why are you so worried about their value if you're never going to trade them? So it's like this never ending cycle with Cashman. I just don't understand the logic behind it. But because of that, I never thought that they were going to be buyers because even if you were a buyer, what was there that was really going to help you out? You could have bought Cody Bellinger, which I just 100% did not believe they were in it at all because Cody Bellinger was going to cost a pretty penny. Cody Bellinger is having a renaissance year right now where he's clearly looking like MVP Cody Bellinger. Main reason I know this because he's on my fantasy team, Jurg. As you know, that's where I follow all my stats and analytics from.
Death taxes and bars brings up a fantasy team when he's on.
Hey, I always got the good players. That's always either way. Other than that, Cody Bellinger was a pretty penny. Who were you going to trade to get Cody Bellinger? All your good players that you have as a Yankees, you don't really have any leverage or any leeway with it because the good players are on big contracts, and even just the people who are names to trade off, they're on contracts as well that you don't want to pay. So shame on the Yankees for even coming into the season without having a starting left fielder, major leaguer. But like I didn't see them buying anything because who was there for them to buy? Who was there for them to sell? Even if they did see people, yeah, of course there's people to buy, but they were walking into the dollar store with 10 cents in their pocket. You couldn't really do much with it.
That's a good one right there that you mentioned. And I wouldn't be surprised actually if Dame was on the show again, which again I would have loved to hear what he would have said. I think Dame would have actually agreed with everything you said here, Bars, because and this comes from people being tapped in, is that Cashman and I think by extension as well, as I like to call him, Baby Steinbrenner, I've just shown that there's not really a commitment, the biggest of commitments in this Yankees team, to want to make that leap, whether it's in free agency, spending a bunch of money at multiple positions, or whether it's with trading and trading guys. Because again, you didn't mention like two or three guys that I think are very noteworthy over the past little bit of time that the Yankees just never gave up on. I mean, one of them they traded eventually, but like, remember the Clint Frazier saga, Bars? They just
Oh my
never,
God.
they just never wanted to trade him before
And
they
he
finally
was the
did.
biggest gem they had because he was just like this hidden talent apparently that no one could stop talking about. This Clint Frazier guy is going to be one of the best major league hitters. Guy can't even find a field now. Where is he still even in the league?
I think he's somewhere in the minors. But there's him, and there's a guy who still has a future. I think this guy's still going to be good. But Anthony Volpe, I think, is the newest victim of the Yankees machine, where touted prospect comes up. He's had a couple moments for the Yankees this season, but just hasn't been the biggest. The hasn't been able to string it consistently. Game after game after game after game for like consistent stretches of time. And the problem is that here's the thing. I think if he was on a different team, like a Pittsburgh Pirate, I'm sorry, Pittsburgh, but like the Pittsburgh Pirates, like the Detroit Tigers, maybe a team like that, I think it'd be more forgiving. I think all of us would be more forgiving for him. And I think for the most part, we're like, oh yeah, he's a rookie, he's going to have a couple struggles. But I think the thing is that you have that New York machine of where the internally, my biggest thing with the Yankees is that when they internally hype someone, it gets out to everybody that the Yankees are high on these guys, and then that sets a level of expectation for media, for pundits, for podcasters like us, and we just assume things. And then when guys don't live up to that standard, a lot of people are going to come bearing down. And then it's like, okay, that kind of damaged goods, not because you're injured, but you haven't lived up to what we thought of you, which realistically you're thinking a little bit too much of the world for a couple of your guys. And now you can't trade them, like you mentioned, for a guy like even a Cody Bellinger, who is on pace for a career high for himself in his batting average. That is, I think, if he doesn't get hurt, will easily surpass his home run and RBI total from his last season with the Dodgers. Probably going, like you said, the best season he'll have had since his 2019 MVP season for himself. Like, if you're not willing to trade for a guy like that, then what are you willing to trade for? The answer is a mid-level rotation arm, clearly. But even that, they didn't trade the most notable name. I think they traded like a 21, 22-year-old pitcher that was having a down year at Double A ball, I want to say, is what it took. So it's like, it's only so much. I'm kind of with you. Like, I think with the Yankees, it's just, we always mention the Yankees around this time because, I mean, they're the Yankees. We have to legally talk about them during baseball season by contractual obligations of ours. But at the same time, just this Yankees team just was not willing to do anything. And it started, well, it's been a while, but I think it really started, we saw it in the fullest effect, Bars, last in the offseason, where it was literally not until the final hour that they kept Aaron Judge. Like, a lot of people memed the reporter, I forget his name off the top of my head, who said that Judge to the Giants was a done deal. I'm convinced it was a done deal, but it was literally the final phone call between Judge, Cashman, and Steinbrenner to convince him to stay a Yankee. I think Judge would have been out of there if they would have thought we're going to have to let him go. I think he would be a Giant right now if that final phone call doesn't happen. So you're talking about a team that was this close. People can't see because this is a visual medium, or audio medium, excuse me, but this close, as I hold my fingers very close to one another, this close to losing their franchise player during the offseason because they were almost not willing to pay him what he wanted, despite an MVP winning season. So it doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form. Now that, again, this is why I like talking it out and like presenting it, because yeah, this Yankees team just, they do not give off the vibe of that they're actually all in. And then that has to bring up the question of, well, what the hell is the future of this team going to be like when you just paid Judge last season going into the season, his contract, he's got 8 years left at that big deal, and you still have Garrett Cole for what, probably 8 more years they still have Cole under contract for as well. Like, you have two guys who you paid over $300 million to yourselves. You got to do something with them in theory, but they just don't look like they're willing to do it.
Man, it all comes back to just at the time it was one of the greatest trades. It was a robbery, it was a steal because you had just gotten the former NL MVP and John Carlos Stanton for it was a bag of peanuts. I forgot who it was. It was like
It was Castro, it was Steven Castro, and like two prospects, I want to say, something like
exactly.
that.
And you haven't even heard of these prospects since the trade. So they got the biggest steal at the moment. It sound great. It was a little overkill. You'd rather have gotten Bryce Harper during that time. But at the time, it's easy, like you said, to play some Monday night quarterback, and it was a great trade at the time. Now it's what's hindering you because you're paying a guy 30 million, 25 plus, whatever it is for Stanton, and the guy can't even run the bases, let alone play left or right field. So you just got a guy who's glued into the DH spot, and it's hindering everything because you need someone else to play the position you traded him to play for. And it adds to this, there's no salary cap in baseball, but the Steinburners, they're no longer the Steinburners of past. They're just businessmen who like making cheap deals at this point. So how he isn't going anywhere. So it's just you with John Carlos Stanton not going anywhere as well, you're just stuck where you are, where it's going to be these three guys, Cole, Judge, and Stanton, and you're just paying them up until the end of the contract, which is for another, 7 years, like you said?
Yeah, for a couple of those guys, I think Stanton is definitely. I want to say he's maybe a little bit short term than those two, but I'd have to check back on how many years was left from when he signed that deal with the Marlins. But yeah, it's just one of those things where you talk about an anchor. It sucks because Stanton has actually done good for the Yankees when they've made the playoffs. The problem is that they're not going to make the playoffs, so you can't even say he's going to do good for you. And all due respect, I would like the guy to be a little bit better than just for like a select 6 to 10 games on the season compared to the other 162 we have to play. But that's just me. Um, a quick question before we move on to the Mets because you can't ignore it forever, Bars. You have to face your problems head on sometimes. Um,
Try.
for the Yankees, do you think between Cashman and Boone, do you see either one or both of them being out of there this season after this season, or do you
No,
think they're just going to run it back?
no, absolutely not. They're running it back. I don't see anything. Realistically, I was just having this convo with a friend earlier today. If you had to rank in order people you blame, it's Cashman's number one, obviously, because he constructed this team.
Yeah,
But Cashman, he's the third Steinbrenner. He's going nowhere. He's part of the family. He's locked in. Number two is not even Aaron Boone. I blame the players because albeit it's not the greatest roster, there's a lot of people not playing to the back of their card this season. And that's really what hurts the Yankees because everyone's just expecting Aaron Judge to will them into another playoff, just like he did last year. And that's just not the case. You don't have the team built for that. You need everyone to be able to play. And to be honest, you need the analytic guys to shut the hell up. That's what really you need. You need Boone to do his job. Yes, he hasn't made great choices, which is why he's number 3 in that list. But he's not as bad a manager as people are making him seem to be. He's just a guy who's trying to do a job but doesn't have the tools required to do that job. So of course you're gonna make some dumb moves, but sometimes you got to make dumb moves because that's the only thing that's gonna work out. Plain crazy.
yeah. So, and I'm with you. I actually think Boone this season in particular gets a little bit more slack from me because I just think so much has gotten in the way of them being able to succeed. And like you said, it's guys not performing up to their level, whether it be young guys that they brought in or whether it be the veterans that just are not, being that good. DJ LeMahieu, who it was what was it this past offseason or was it the offseason before where it was a
Two
big deal
off
that they
seasons ago, where he looked like he was an MVP stud. Then last year he had a rough season, and this year it's looking like that rough season is going to be the normal.
Yeah, and that it's officially, the downtrodden years of his career. Stanton, who we've already gone to nauseum about, even again pitching, just the inconsistency of Severino came back late last season. Actually, wasn't looking too bad this season. Again, injury, just not performing great. You have the
Anthony Rizzo, who looked like beginning of the year he was about to be an MVP candidate, and now he's like the third worst batter in MLB right now
yep
in the entire league, which is just mind blowing.
fallen off the map, hit himself as well. Carlos Rodon, a lot of missed time due to injuries this season. Basically, damn near the entire season so far due to injury. Like it's you talk about being bit by the bug. I think we got to see if that bug is a bit radioactive because goddamn, it's a lot of guys missing time and a lot of guys just not playing well at the end of the day. So for the Yankees, tough times. They did basically nothing at the deadline, too much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of Yankees fans as a whole. And all Yankees fans, you kind of do it to yourselves a little bit if you have the expectations of something happening. So there's that. But yeah, it's tragic on that end of New York. So it's tragic in the Bronx. Is it tragic in Queens too? The answer's kind of yes. But
Not kinda.
yeah,
Oh, it's so tragic,
well,
Jurg. Don't undersell it.
true. The answer is yes. But here's the difference now. It's tragic but at less value on the roster for salary. The New York Mets, it was funny how we mentioned how quickly things turn, and it was literally when he bought the team, or maybe it was a little bit after he bought the team, that old Stevie Cohen, Papa Cohen, was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be willing to spend whatever to help bring this team up to that next level." And then what was it? Your guy Epler, your guy's general manager, after the deadline was like, "You know what? It's going to take a little bit of time here to get things together." And he was not wrong. The New York Metropolitans, the New York Mets, traded a decent amount of players. I believe is the five main ones. If anyone else was traded, bars, please add on to it. But the five main guys that were traded from the Mets, it started small with David Robertson going to the Miami Marlins. Again, the Marlins buying uh, from another team willing to sell. They get what for them is basically going to be a closing option for them. Uh, the Mets also traded a couple hitters. Tommy Pham went to the Arizona Diamondbacks, and Mark Canha went to the Milwaukee Brewers. But there were two names in particular that were dealt, and I'm pretty sure that's who the people are waiting for me to mention. Max Scherzer, about literally was like a day or two before the trade went down. The Mets and Scherzer worked out an agreement that he would be willing to accept a trade to anywhere. Uh, I guess was it a no trade clause that he had?
Yes, correct.
So it was him basically saying that they were cool. He was cool with them being to use to trade him via his no trade clause, hoping that it would work out well. And ultimately, that worked out well because he went to the Texas Rangers. It was a straight 1-for-1 in the deal where they got the Rangers. Was he number one at the time? Maybe number two. It was one of, if not the top prospect in the system, Luis Angel Acuna. So Ronald Acuna's little brother, actually, I believe, or cousin. His brother or cousin?
His brother.
Brother. So they got Luis. I'm gonna just call him L.A. Acuna. They got old L.A. Acuna from the Rangers, sending Mad Max there, and also the Mets covering for $35 million of Mad Max's salary for the so that the Rangers don't have to pay that. So that was the big deal itself. And then a couple days later, the trading, the wheelin' and dealin' continued as the New York Mets with the Houston Astros made a trade. The Mets acquired Drew Gilbert, and it was another player for Justin Verlander. Justin Verlander, the second time at a trade deadline that he gets sent to the Houston Astros, funny enough. But Justin Verlander, who left the Astros 7 months ago, signed with the Mets. And the big deal was that you let DeGrom go, and you have Mad Max and Verlander there, both on short-term deals for the most part, high AAV, but short-term deals. And it just had to be a 1-2 year window where those two could be the workhorses of your rotation, and everything else would fall in line. The hitting would be there. Pete Alonso would lead the way. Brendan Nimmo would lead the way, and the pitching would just be around those guys. But it all fell apart. It kind of probably fell apart from the World Baseball Classic where Edwin Diaz tore his patellar tendon while celebrating, which sucks because again he didn't even tear it from playing; he tore it from celebrating. But Edwin Diaz out before the season even started due to that injury. Those two just missing various points of the season as well, bars. It was not a clean bill of health for the Mets, just like it wasn't for the Yankees. And ultimately, uh, I don't want to fully call it a collapse yet because I mean there's still technically season to be played, but I think we can call a spade here and say it's not looking good for the Mets in any way. So they trade off a lot of their guys. They get a couple prospects here and there back, but for the most part, obviously, I think the thing that a lot of people will be focusing on will not be what you guys got back. It'll be what you guys gave up and what was a broken promise of a 2023 season. Bars, you are the Mets fan. Me and Chris always do this for Dame with the Yankees, so I'm going to fully cede the floor to you, my man. Sing your heart
Oh
out.
man, I can't even. Like I feel like you want to rant, but I can't even rant because it's just so sad. I'm just sad right now because this isn't even. I might be. Some people might say I'm being dramatic, but I don't think so. This is honestly like one of the most embarrassing teams in the history of baseball. You're talking about one of the most expensive rosters ever constructed, and we're looking like one of the worst teams in baseball at the moment, to be quite honest with you. First of all, I guess the biggest thing that ran about is this Justin Verlander trade. What was that? just like we got so hosed on that trade. We got robbed in that trade. We're going to pay half his contract for this year, next year. And then if he does, like, if he agrees to the option or whatever it is, I don't understand the contract talk. But long story short, if he accepts the next 2 years, we're paying for like 90 million for Justin Verlander. And it's not even like we got two of their best prospects. We got just like two random guys out of the Astros farm system, which isn't even that good a farm system anymore because everyone who was good in their farm system is currently on the Astros. So you're talking about one of the weakest farm systems in the league. This felt like Justin Verlander. They just got rid of him to get rid of him at this point, which I just didn't understand. Yes, he's like 40 something, but at this point, if that's what we were going to get, why not keep him for next year as well? Because you need someone to pitch in 2024. Yeah, it might have been a down season. You might be telling Scherzer and Verlander, hey, we're not going to be in it next year. But who knows? Because we thought we were in it this year, and clearly we weren't in it. You're saying the downfall started with Edwin Diaz tearing his patellar. Honestly, I think the downfall started at the trade deadline because at the trade deadline, you get me freaking what's his name? Fat boy. My milkshake brings all the girls to the yard. Daniel Vogelback. There you go.
Oh,
Jesus
not
Christ.
Vogel.
Oh my God. Let me tell you, you get me him and freaking what's his name from San Francisco, Darren Ruff, who doesn't even see the field, basically. Two of the worst trades you could possibly make, and you tell me I'm expecting to make a championship run then. That was when we should have been making trades, because that was when we should have been all in. When we were 101 wins team, and we were just hot, man. We needed an extra bat, and that was it. Now we come into the season, we come in older. We come in nowhere near as good. We lose our star ace. Yes, you replaced him with Justin Verlander, which a lot of people are saying they didn't like the Verlander signing from the beginning because that was a Steve Cohen move. No one wanted him apparently except him. I'm not mad at that. I'm mad at every other move you've done after that because you re-signed Jeff McNeil, who, yes, he won the batting average title last year, but at the same time, he only did it 1 year. So why are you signing him to a contract like that? You re-signed Brandon Nimmo, who you're happy that he returned as a Met for life, but he's grossly overpaid on an 8-year deal. And it's just there was money all spent, which is easy to do when you have nothing but money to spend. But it was money poorly spent because all we did was spend money on retaining players. We didn't gain any good players. The only free agent signing we had was Senga, who looks god awful. Quintana honestly should have been traded because he's been hurt all season and he pitched about 2 games so far and looks good. I would have traded him for pieces. If you're really looking to restart, why not just completely break it apart? Why is Ottavino still on this team? I heard there was whispers of Pete Alonso being traded. No, that's the one guy you got to keep. It's just it's embarrassing because our farm system, you knew when Steve Cohen bought it, our farm system wasn't good. But you got young guys like Brett Beatty coming up and Francisco Alvarez and Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos just looks like he's completely overwhelmed by the league. Beatty's looking nowhere near how good he's supposed to be. He's looking just like a average player at best because there's times he looks like he's still a minor leaguer who shouldn't be in the league. And you got Francisco Alvarez, who it seems like everyone likes, but he's clearly a year or two away from really making an impact on this roster. So it's just there's holes all over the place that never got filled because we didn't do anything for the bullpen. Long story short, the Scherzer trade was the only good trade in my opinion. Everything else, it was just, yeah, we filled up it was more depth moves. And it's just the Justin Verlander trade was the purest robbery in the robbery. We gave the Houston Astros World Series title this year with that trade, essentially. And I'm just over it. We need someone who has a baseball mind in here. I find it funny that everyone's taking what Billy Epler says to heart because realistically, the man might not be in the building next year. If he is, I'll be shocked. But hopefully, it sounded like Stearns from Milwaukee is going to be our president next year. Hopefully, this guy knows what he's doing. But we just need a baseball mind in there. We tried doing the quick New York minute fix, and it just clearly blew up in our face. And I'm glad to see we're building the farm system. But does everyone's saying, because the quote was, we're not competitive next year, maybe 2024, probably 2025. I got to be honest with you. It's looking like 2026, in my opinion.
There it is. What a what a performance!
Oh God,
My God.
I can't. It's disgusting.
No, it's tough. And again, we had two teams here, bars, entering this season on both sides, one on the AL, one on the NL, that there were high expectations within the fan bases. Even myself, I thought the Mets were going to have a pretty good season for the most part.
New
I thought
York sports was at an all-time high last year.
they really were. They really were. Both these teams made the playoffs last year. Then going into the season, it just it all felt like the idea, like it was the conversation of which team has a better chance of winning the World Series first between them with the Yankees and the Mets. Now it's a conversation on which team is going to make the playoffs between the two of them next season, if that. So it's downtrodden times to say the very least. And like you said, it's management turnover. I guess really quick, aside from the general manager, the executive, and who's going to be making the moves, are there any other off the field changes that you could see happening? Like, do you think Buck is coming back? What do you think about his long term staying there? And more importantly, Bards, do you think these couple seasons now in a row are going to make Steve Cohen take a step back from how like out there and boisterous he's been so far as the Mets owner? Like, he could still spend here and there, but maybe a little bit smarter with it. What do you think?
I think, Buck is a question mark, man, because it's all going to depend on the guy who comes in here and how he wants to do it. Buck is a great coach. This year, don't be fooled. Yeah, he's making a bunch of mistakes, but at the same time, it's just like, what are you going to do at this point? You can't say there's nothing you could say to inspire these guys at this point. You probably should trade off a few more people just to clear up some air, some fresh names, some fresh eyes in this thing. But Buck has shown us he's a great coach when it comes to a rebuilding team. So i- if he goes, am I surprised? No, because it's the new general manager, president, whoever it is, that's their team. They're going to make the moves they got to make. But at the same time, if he stays, not surprised either because Buck has shown he is the type of coach who he'll teach the fundamentals. He'll teach the young guys, get them going. He could make something out of nothing. Just unfortunately, he didn't have his magic this year for that. Other than that, it's I don't know what moves could really be made off the field that are really going to help this team. We need some major. I see spending happening, but in terms of let's say some people think we're in it for Showtime. I don't think there's any shot we go for Otani. I think it's going to be a bunch of short term deals next year just to be kind of competitive and you know essentially build your base because it's going to be like I said, the new president Stearns, whoever it may be, hopefully Epler comes in and they're working with limited items. We are overpriced asset essentially because we look a lot better than we are, and we have a lot more holes than people think we do.
So there it is, confirmed. Shohei Ohtani not going to the Mets apparently, but there it is, a downtrodden year in the baseball world for New York teams in 2023. Will there be better hopes in 2024? We'll see. I guess last thing to close it out because we talked about with the Mets and obviously being so far down in the division, so far out of the wild card. Yankees are a little bit closer in that regard. What do you think, Bars? Do you think, real quick, yes or no? Do you think the Yankees are able to squeeze in there and make that wild card run?
No.
Huh?
And that's not me being a Yankee hater. I had one of my friends who's the biggest Yankee fan I know. I was talking to him today, and he didn't even hesitate when I asked him. He said no as well. I thought it was just me being biased, but no, I don't see him making it.
I don't blame you. And again, I putting words in his mouth a little bit, but I think even Dame would agree. I think if we asked Dame if he was here, I think he would say the exact same thing about his feelings about any potential Yankees run, or I guess in this case, lack thereof. So tough time for New York sports. 2022 baseball season, amazing year. 2023. Let's not talk about that for New York baseball teams. So that concludes that portion of it. Now to the last bit of this 2023 MLB Trade Deadline talk here on the Somewhat Sports Podcast. Again, hosted by BNB on this one. Other teams that were active, Bars. We're just going to go really quick here. We could each name like one, two, maybe three teams if we think of it, but like just one or two teams here. A team that was active at this deadline that you think is going to make a bit of a run here in the second half of the season, that their deals are going to make a big difference for them coming here in the last couple months of 2023.
Oh man, the team that I think their move is going to make the best. I honestly, a tie for me between the Marlins and the Rangers because coming into the season, I knew the Rangers were going to be. I knew they were going to be good. I didn't realize they were going to be this good. So just the Rangers making that move. If Evaldi isn't as hurt as it seems like he may be, I think it's the Rangers because they made moves. They're going for it this year. Their rotation was really the weakest part of their team at the moment, and they made moves for Scherzer and Jordan Montgomery, who he's not the best pitcher, but Jordan Montgomery is that depth piece they needed in their rotation. So you got a three-headed monster. Well, I mean, DeGrom isn't there at the moment, but if you were to have DeGrom healthy, imagine that three-headed monster: DeGrom, Scherzer, and Nathan Eovaldi. But going into the playoffs with Scherzer, Nathan Eovaldi, who's having a career year this year, and Jordan Montgomery, who it seems like the Rangers may be a secret pitching factory. They may have the secret sauce that the Rays and Astros have, because I've been hearing a lot of things about their analytic team as well. I Hey man, if Jordan Montgomery has a hot playoff season, don't be shocked. That's all I'm saying.
Nice. And you also mentioned the Marlins there. They got, again, I think this was even a week before the deadline happened, but they got Jorge Lopez in a trade. They get David Robertson. They get Berger from the White Sox. And just before the deadline passed, they made a trade with the Guardians to get Josh Bell. So they get a couple hitters in there, add some power bats into that lineup, a couple guys for the rotation. I think Lopez more to fill out the back end of the starting rotation, and Robertson again to be that setup, maybe closer guy. You mentioned them as well. Like how excited should the Marlins be for this season for themselves? Where yes, they're third in their division, but at 58 and 52, this is the best they've been through 100 plus games probably in years, maybe even a decade plus with this team. What do you think about the Marlins' outlook on things for the rest of 2023?
I like the moves they made because it shows they're making a concerted effort. Like you said, Jorge Lopez, Robertson, just to bulk up your pitching. But also Berger, who, like I said, he has 25 home runs, which they definitely need a little more pop in their lineup. But kid's also batting like 214 with almost like a 30% strike rate. So that's nothing great, but they needed somebody in there to bring more pop because they did trade away Garrett Cooper when they brought in Josh Bell as well. But Josh Bell has pop. So, like I said, they didn't bring in pieces who are going to help push them and make this ultimate run that you're like, oh man, I feel really great going into this with this star on my team. But they made a couple of moves here where it's better than Daniel Vogelback and Darren Ruff. I can tell you that much. They're definitely making a concerted effort to not only make the playoffs, but see if they could go on a little run. So I do like the moves they made. Do I think they were the best moves? Questionable, but they're definitely better. They're a better spot they are today than they were about a week ago, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And in that endeavor, you're talking about a team that we'll see how it really plays out for them to end off the season. But a team that said no, we're not going to sell, we're not going to trade Showtime, and we're actually going to try to build up bars. We kind of been asking this for a while with the Los Angeles Angels. They made some moves. They get Lucas Giolito and add him to the rotation. Then another trade that they made, getting two players from the Colorado Rockies, CJ Crone, who's known for hitting, he's had a couple 20 home run seasons in his career, and then Randall Grichuk, who just a consistent all around hitter, decent. As I've heard Bars talk about a couple guys in podcasts past, he's just a baseball guy.
He's a baseball guy,
He's
man.
he's
Loves the sport.
exactly. So, what do you think of the Angels not selling Bars and making that effort to what we're gonna try to surround our talent with a couple guys here that maybe we can make a run.
I mean, if you're trying to keep Otani, that's the move. You can't be selling, and it's not like they're not in it. They're in it. They got a wild card spot for sure. You're a couple games back in your division. Let me see, hang on, 7 games back in your division. So that's a hefty run. But in terms of the wild card, they're right in the middle of it. You're honestly in a better spot than the Yankees are in terms of the wild card. I'm pretty sure they're one spot ahead of the Yankees for the wild card. So the fact they're making a run for it, I like to see. Lucas Giolito, I think they traded a little too much for him, but you like that they acknowledge the fact that their rotation isn't the best it could be, so they're going ahead and make a move for there. I really actually like the Cron and Grand Truck, however the hell you say this guy's name, Randall Grichuk, whatever. Either way, I like the move for those two guys. Yes, they're Colorado guys, so you question if their pop is going to translate out to the real world. I believe Cron's numbers are a lot better when he was playing in Colorado than when he was on the road. But CJ Cron, all right, so I'm really big on CJ Cron, but the thing is, he's coming from a back injury earlier in this year.
Mm-hmm.
But if he stays healthy, man, like you said, that guy knows how to smack the ball. And aside from knowing how to smack the ball, he also hits about 270. He could be a 300 hitter when he's really on. So I like CJ Cron. I'm a big fan of him. I think he's one of the better hitting first basemen in the league. And Truck just added that extra outfield depth they needed, and he's having a good season. I believe he's batting about 300, 280, somewhere around there. So it's two bats you certainly needed. And if you're ever making a bid in Otani and begging him to stay, this is clearly it. Because if he doesn't stay after this year, you just got to consider trading Mike Trout at that point, because what do you have at this point?
Not a lot.
Literally not a lot because they just traded part like a good chunk of their farm for these three moves. So
Yeah.
even in looking into the future, it's not looking good at all. But you got Brandon Drury coming back from the IL, good utility man. He's probably going to go back at second base. You got the extra guy in outfield. It's just if you could get healthy and you get all your guys playing, Mike Trout, your new acquisitions, and everyone's hitting the way they should, they could make a run, man. Keep an eye for them. It's just their pitching, it needs to make the step up.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. That AL is a murderer's row this season. We're going to have a number of very good and talented teams miss out on the playoffs because there's only 3 wild card spots. And again, I'll just mention it. You have a 66 win Tampa Bay team is going to be a wild card team. You have a 62 win Houston Astro team right now is looking to be a wild card team. How unfortunate it is for the Angels that the season where they're finally a couple games above 500 after the trade deadline, just the rest of the AL, sans the Central, decided to be like, all right, let's have a really good year, shall we?
It's insane because you got teams like Seattle too, who's having a great year, in my opinion, and they're gonna have games out of the wild card race. It's crazy. It's just a complete gauntlet. But there's 4 teams still in it that are fighting for that spot. It's really you just gotta hope one of the teams in the wild card drops off, and it's looking like it might be Toronto with that Bo Bichette injury I mentioned earlier.
Yep, potentially the Blue Jays themselves, 60 wins. They were also active with a couple trades, which we'll actually get to here. Very quickly, we're going to go rapid fire here because I have one final big question for us to answer to finish off the pod episode. Bars, again, appreciate you coming on, brother. You're always welcome, as you know this. A little B&B takeover of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. This is just like when Kevin Nash and Scott Hall came into WCW in the 90s. Totally. Probably lost the audience there with that reference. But really quick, Bars, we're going to go rapid fire on a couple of these teams that were relatively active. I'm just going to briefly mention them, and we're both going to say, did we like what they did at the deadline, or were we kind of in terms of if it'll make a difference for them? So let me just go in the order that I have it listed here. The Arizona Diamondbacks got Paul Sewald in a deal, got Jace Peterson in a deal from the Oakland A's, and of course, as I mentioned, they got Pham earlier from the Mets. What are your thoughts about the Diamondbacks?
I like it. Those are moves that are hopefully going to throw them. They're only a game away from a wild card spot. Milwaukee, I don't really got faith in like that. So those are 2 moves that are going to hopefully get them over the hump and either beat out Miami and Milwaukee, or they're just going to be right there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was actually a big proponent of the Diamondbacks going into the season. I predicted them to finish third in the NL West, actually, coming in. Now, they're not above one of the teams I thought they would be, because that division has certainly been a little bit interesting. But I was a big believer in the Diamondbacks going into this season. I thought they were better than most were trying to give them credit for. And I like the fact that they're making, these Bars, I think what they are, they're moves that didn't cost them a lot. This didn't cost them the best of their farm system. They made marginal upgrades without giving up too much in value. Whenever you do that, it's an absolute W to say the very least. So there's that. I'm actually going to skip because I'm going to save this next team for last because this team I mentioned the White Sox as the biggest disappointment of the season. This team might surpass Chicago actually in that, and so I'll actually save this next team for last. Toronto Blue Jays. We mentioned it before. 2 trades with the St. Louis Cardinals. Why they didn't just do 2-for-1 deal? Who the hell knows? But Jordan Hicks and DeJong to the Blue Jays. What are your thoughts on that?
I like the trade, but like I said, I feel like Paul DeJong was only a move because literally the night right before that trade, Bo Bichette ended up getting a knee injury. He's on the 10-day IL. It's not looking like anything serious, but that felt more like an insurance kind of policy. It didn't cost them much, I think. And Hicks, they needed a little more bullpen help. It's a good trade. He's having a good season. Hopefully, he gets some more of that fire that he had back in the day.
I'm with you there. I think this could be good for the Blue Jays. Again, they're competing in the wild card. I believe they're second in the AL wild card race at this point, which is a big position to have, especially with that murderer's row you mentioned earlier.
I
So,
think they're third right now. I
oh,
think
are
they're
they?
holding on. Yeah, it's Houston second.
Oh, right. Because what's it called? Tampa is first.
Tampa's
Because
first.
Jesus
Yep.
Christ, this wild card is so stacked.
AL beast, man. It's
Hey,
AL
just
beast.
the league as a whole is just absolutely absurd in the AL side of things. So, Blue Jays solid moves right there. The Los Angeles Dodgers, kind of more underrated moves. They get Ahmed Rosario in a trade. They got Kiki and Hernandez in a trade. Both kind of more pre-trade deadline deals. And then Lance Lynn from the White Sox, as I mentioned before. What were your thoughts on it? It didn't These, especially Rosario and Hernandez, they're not necessarily having the best seasons possible, but we know how the Dodgers work bars. Somehow these guys are going to hit like 10 home runs down the stretch for them, and Lance Lynn is going to go 5-0 after the All Star break, after this trade deadline break. But what do you think? I think the Dodgers, they're a good team. I think this is just more extra insurance, I guess, but this doesn't necessarily move the needle for me. Where like, oh, this puts them over the top in an NL that's pretty wide open. I think they're just good moves.
Nah, yeah, this certainly wasn't anything to blow the top off, like you said. But these were moves, death moves. They Dodgers haven't been the healthiest team in the league, and also you're bringing back Kiki, who he was a former Dodger, so they know what they're getting in him. He's more like a utility guy than a real starter. Maybe they're bringing him for that locker room fire because they know what he is. Everyone loves Kiki. It seems like no matter what team he goes to, the Red Sox love him. So I'm kind of surprised they trade him, but hey, he's back home. Lance Lynn, they needed a little bit more on their rotation, so I think that was a nice add. Like I said, it wasn't really the best time to get him, but hey, they're the Dodgers. I'm sure they'll figure something out. And Ahmed Rosario, I wouldn't be shocked if he makes like a game-saving playoff catch middle of freaking the NLCS out of nowhere. It's the Dodgers. So these weren't blow your mind trades, but I won't be surprised if each of these guys have some sort of impact down the stretch.
Right. And final team I'm going to mention here, also staying in the NL, staying in the NL West, the San Diego Padres. They got Rich Hill in a trade. They got Scott Barlow and Garrett Cooper. And within the Rich Hill deal, they got G-Man Choi from the Pittsburgh Pirates as well. So the Padres, as I mentioned before, to me, the White Sox, if they're not your most disappointing team going into this year, I think the Padres, most people would have them as that. They're I don't want to say rebounding to form because they're only 6-4 in their last 10, but they're 54-55, only one game below 500. And just, if I'm kind of looking at it, I think what, like five, maybe 4 games behind the the last wild card spot. So they're certainly going to be in the race for it. But what were your thoughts on this team that's clearly making, I don't know if desperation would be the proper word, but as many moves as they can to avoid a flame out of this season?
No, it's definitely desperation. They're grabbing for straws, man. I don't get it. What happened this year with them? They had all the names. They had it. You really thought it was another one of those teams that I was loved watching and rooting for just because they had a young core, and then they started spending some money, and they got the Juan Soto, they got the Manny Machado, you know. So it feels like it got really weird for San Diego once Fernando Tatis had that whole steroid thing happen with him. That's where it really kind of just started getting kind of odd for them. And you could really look at that as maybe that was the downfall because it felt like players were going there to play with him. And once you have a player with a steroid stigma, it takes a while till that stink comes off. And you need some wins to wash that stink off. And unfortunately, they're not getting the wins. I think it's just grasping for straws, though, because like you said, they're 4 or 5 games out of a wild card. And they got 3 teams in front of them, 4 if you count Milwaukee, but I'm certain Milwaukee's going to lose that wild card spot. But I like Chicago, Arizona, and Miami over them. And it's crazy to say I like Chicago over them with all the talent they got in San Diego. So unless they go on one of the greatest runs you've seen on the second half of the season, it's just I don't see it happening. I think you're going to see Miami or Arizona in that final wild card spot.
Nice, nice. I like to hear it. Of course, hopefully the Padres just make it entertaining because for baseball, for such a long season, as we enter the month of August, which is kind of like sort of the dog days, the end of the dog days of the summer, because the sports calendar is really starting to ramp up here. Because football will be back. You hope that baseball can really make things interesting with some wild card races. I think it will just by default because, good lord, the AL is stacked with great teams, and at least the NL wild card is close as well. So really just good teams all around. And I think this is the healthiest baseball season we've had in quite a while. I think this is the best season post-pandemic that MLB has had. Just team after team is being competitive as hell here in
The
terms
rule
of.
changes, man. They made a huge change. The game's interesting to watch again. This goes by quick.
And I know a certain guy who was a big fan of some of these rule changes and was very happy when they were made. So,
How
so
could that
all right, Bars. Final big time question here. We've mentioned this guy a couple times in the show. We mentioned him during the Cardinals. We kind of mentioned him with the Angels. Shohei Showtime Otani. It's going to be a free agent. Finally, guys barely hit free agency, but the international players tend to hit free agency relatively quick. Shohei Otani will have his destiny in his hands. I hope actually to get you on for an MLB free agency episode, but let's say hypothetically can't happen. I want to hear from you right now, and if it changes, so be it. But right now, gut feeling: does Shohei Otani stay an Angel? And if no, where does he go in your mind?
I mean, it like how? My question is how? does it not feel like he's on the Dodgers next year? You can't tell me it doesn't feel like it's just that's what's gonna happen because he doesn't want to go East Coast. I'm a firm believer. I'm believing the rumors he's not going East Coast because one, I feel like he's the type that a lot of these international guys they enjoy going back home. So I feel like he's the type to enjoy going back to Japan. You go to East Coast, that's a 24-hour trip. I feel like he's not a fan of that whatsoever. But aside from that, the West Coast, especially in the Cali area, they're big on the Japanese culture. So it's not like he's too far from home when he's there. But aside from all the cultural stuff, you know, he doesn't have to move if he goes to the Dodgers. He could keep his apartment, he could keep his house, whatever it is. He changes his commute by 20 minutes maybe, and that's about it. You're going to the nicer team, the nicer stadium, and he's going to win. The biggest thing out of this, I think, is if I'm Shohei, aside from contract, because you're talking about not the greatest player in the league at the moment. You're talking about the greatest player of all time. I don't care what anyone says. This guy, we will never see another Shohei Ohtani. So at my job, I actually saw Shohei Ohtani. I was in LA working the US Open, and I saw Shohei Ohtani as a guest there. Dude, I could not believe, like, it was literally like looking at a mythical Greek god. This guy was like almost 7 feet tall. It was insane. So like and it was weird because like when I'm sure you've met some athletes in during your job, Jurg, there's just certain athletes when even not even talking to them, just walking by them, there's a certain energy that vibrates off them. And like you feel the big time essentially
Yeah.
coming off them. Shohei had that effect because at first I didn't realize, when you don't see a player in their uniform, you don't realize who they are. It takes a minute. So I'm staring. I'm like, how the hell I know this guy? That's I like, I'm thinking MLB. No, maybe he's a golfer. No, and then it just hit and my jaw dropped once I realized it hit. I recognized the greatness because this is the greatest player of all time. So if I'm him, yes, you go for the bag, but at the same time, how do you not want to go for the wins at this point? You were possibly on one of the worst teams in the MLB. Like, yes, your owner tried. He spent some money, not as much as he could. He's tried getting Anthony Rendon, which was probably the worst signing ever. But other than that, you haven't really made the playoffs. You haven't won anything that's worth mentioning aside from, MVP. Like, how do you not want to go for it? Be in the playoffs, be in a World Series run. So that team is the best team to offer him that chance, and it's the best to essentially not change his living. Some people saying San Francisco. I they're not really big spenders. They were going for Judge, and then they were going for Correa, and they didn't even go for Correa because of the health. It looks like it worked out for everybody, whoever didn't go for Correa. But like, I don't see them outspending LA, and LA is just they're the juggernaut they always are.
Right. I'm with you. I don't think he stays an Angel. I think it's very much clear that that's not going to be. He's not going to be there for too much longer. Um, I could accept the fact that he probably will end up being a Dodger, but I actually would love to see him be a San Francisco Giant. I think it would just be interesting if he would go there. Like you said, you still stay in California. Now you got to uproot the apartment a little bit or house, condo,
That's a little
whatever the hell he
further
has.
drive,
It's
yeah.
well, Bars, forget the drive. You just got to move location at that point. But you're still on the West Coast. You still have that easy flight back for home. Culturally, like West Coast, like you said, I think he'll still be at home. I would just really because again, Bars, for me this season, the Giants right now are the second seed in the in the NL West. They keep on doing this thing where when we think they're not going to be all that, they're going to be second or first in the goddamn division. So what if you get them a guy who could be the ace or the number two in the rotation, and maybe you want to take that pressure off of him, top two pitcher in your rotation, and can also hit 30, 40 bombs on the season. And what that would do for the San Francisco Giants, I think, would be massive. Like you mentioned, they were in on Judge before they lost him at the very end. Correa, they were willing to do it. Just it was that one injury. I don't think an injury is going to scare them from Shohei Ohtani in any way, shape, or form. I think this would be the player that they would be willing to break that bank for. And again, someone's going to have to break the bank because we were talking about this like before with a couple guys in the past bars. We talked about, oh, this guy's coming up. He's going to be the next $300 million guy. This guy's going to be the first. We're waiting for the first well, not first one actually. Trout got his, but the first $500 million player. I think Shohei Ohtani's easily
It's
making
got to
300.
be Shohei. I don't understand how it's not,
If
to
it's
be
if it's
honest.
not him, we may not see it for a decade plus because there's literally no other player I could envision giving that money to.
It's literally like I said, just recognize the greatness. We're never gonna see this again ever. I don't care who you are. You're talking about someone who has almost as many strikeouts, if not pitches better than Garrett Cole and more home runs than Aaron Judge. You know, you're talking about literally two of the best players at their position, who coincidentally should play at the same team, but two of the best players at their position, and this guy is having a better season than both of them at their respective jobs. It's insane what he is doing. I hope everyone's really appreciating the greatness, because you think about it, how many more years can he keep this up with doing both? I think maybe 3, 4, but at some point he's going to focus in on just one and live with that longevity. So enjoy it while we got it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. We are seeing, the way that they talked about, and this is old timey baseball writers talking about Babe Ruth, and that he was able to do both before eventually he just focused on the hitting part. Like, that's basically it with Shohei, but like he's doing it at an even higher level. And like this is a guy who literally, like you're saying, Bars, at the same time right now, he's a Cy Young caliber pitcher while also being a Silver Slugger MVP candidate just off of home runs alone. And I still say this: if Aaron Judge doesn't set the AL home run record last season, then last season's MVP could have and should have gone to Shohei. And I think this season's AL MVP award is going to go to Shohei Ohtani as well. Like, Shohei Ohtani is going to be known as the AL MVP taker, because there's going to be a couple guys over the next 3-4 years that are going to have really good seasons, but because he's just that dude, he deserves it more than everybody else, because this is a conversation where we can actually say the best player in baseball is being given, the best player in a sport is going to be given the MVP award, because it's not even close, like you said. And at the end, and I think to punctuate it, like you said, Bars, you said it, appreciate the greatness. Appreciate the greatness. Just like I hope the people have appreciated the greatness of the baseball Don himself coming on to this edition.
What a segue. What a segue.
Come on. You know I do this, man. You know I do this, but I appreciate the baseball Don and him gracing us with his presence, being a part of the show, and helping me steer this ship on course. And Bars, I think we did a good job, brother. It's been a little bit, but you know what? We dusted it off.
A little rusty, but it felt good. It felt good to be out here again, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course, brother. Of course. I always know I can rely on you to be here. And we always have fun just talking sports at the end of the day. And if they're, aside from Chris and Dame and also my compatriots of, chaos that I do another pod with, you are one of the people that I will say yes to anytime doing a podcast with. I always appreciate you being on, brother.
You're making me blush, man.
But before we truly exit it out, please let the people know where they can follow you.
Bars Talks on Instagram and Twitter, X, whatever the hell the thing is called now. I don't even know. But that weird, wacky app that you send tweets, X's. I don't even know what to call it anymore, man. But those two things. You can look me up on Bunts and Bruises Podcast. You're not going to see any recent episodes. It's, started a new job last year. I'm finally getting comfortable in it. So maybe see something soon. Who knows? I'm getting the itch lately, man. I'm not going to lie. So hopefully you guys hear more of me.
There we go. Hey, always. We need to hear more of you. The people need to hear more of the Don himself doing his thing. And like you said, the wacky world of social media changing. But one thing that will never change, ladies and gentlemen, is where you can find the Somewhat Sports Podcast on Instagram, somewhat.sports there. Please follow us on IG, like the post. We always update things. And as the NFL season's almost here, guys, you're going to get the updates on Clowns and Crowns after a couple weeks that Chris, Dame, and I do. You're going to get the weekly predictions that we do. And you're going to get updates every single time an episode of this podcast is posted on YouTube and Spotify, somewhat spaced in sports for this amazing podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Spotify. Give us 5 stars. Please rate the show. Let us know what you want to hear more of. More guests? Of course, we always want that. Please let us know people that you would love to get on the show, and more amazing creators and podcasters like the Don himself that could join us for amazing conversations like these. To the beautiful people listening to this, thank you all so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Somewhat Sports Podcast, and we will see you guys next week.